All right, this video is talking about different types of price indexes. The last video was showing you how to determine price indexes. This video is just talking about the different types of price indexes. So there are three main types of price indexes. The first type is what we call a consumer price index. This is called the CPI for short. CPI is the most familiar. This is the one that usually gets reported as far as the inflation rates. But basically, it looks at the costs of purchases of a typical urban American family. People think that the CPI actually overstates inflation because the market basket items, the items in the market basket actually change over time, and we generally substitute expensive items for inexpensive items, and we also have innovation over time. What I mean by this is that, for example, if we're comparing the market basket of 2016 versus 1986, okay, obviously we have some major changes in there. So we have some innovation that has happened. I mean, obviously cell phones weren't a big thing in 1986. We also have things that we substitute out where we substitute out expensive items for cheaper ones, and so those things are not included, and that's not really thought about in what we're considering as part of our market basket. So some people actually believe that the CPI is actually inflated more than overestimates basically inflation. So just to give you a broad picture, this is what is actually in the CPI right now. This is the most recent weighting, as it says, was in December 2014. So it looks like remember the CPI, we're thinking about the CPI as basically a virtual shopping cart. So 42% of our shopping cart is made up of housing. 15.27% is made up of food and beverages. You can kind of see the breakdown here, but it gives you an idea of the breakdown of what is actually made up of our virtual shopping cart. The other thing I have to show you is this is the Consumer Price Index, the CPI, over the last, it looks like about 100 years. So over the last 100 years, 1913 to 2014, what the CPI is the blue line, and the red line is the change in the average CPI. So you can see how much the average CPI has changed over the last basically 100 years. So it gives you an idea of where we've been at. Okay, another second price index is the Producer Price Index, or the PPI. The Producer Price Index is going to be where your market basket, so that virtual shopping cart, is made up of all the stuff that producers need to be able to provide their product. So that includes, for example, raw materials. So this is what I found of information about what is in the PPI. So it says that 25% is capital equipment, 9% is energy, so electricity. Finished consumer goods, 40%. So I'm assuming those are going to be used to those consumer goods that they need to provide their product. So some things in there, and then food for their workers. So a lot of people point out that the PPI is actually a leading indicator of inflation changes, and this makes sense if you think about it, because the PPI is talking about the raw materials, and so if we're saying that the Producer Price Index is increasing, okay, so that means the price of all the raw materials is going up. It's kind of an indicator that the CPI is going to go up, because the price that the producer going to be charging their customer is going to increase. So that makes sense as well. This is just a graph comparing the CPI and the PPI. So you can see that the PPI does they kind of follow each other, but the PPI is kind of above the CPI as far as the differences, because most often they have to pass on those differences to their consumer and their customer. All right, the last price index, and it's kind of, but not really a price index, is the GDP deflator. And the GDP deflator basically shows the changes in GDP from nominal to real GDP. It looks like a price index and it kind of acts like a price index, so that's why we explain it that way. So in order to figure out the GDP deflator, we take the nominal GDP divided by the real GDP multiplied by 100. So if you remember when we talked about real and nominal GDP is going to be whatever current prices are for all of our spending, okay? And real GDP is taking out inflation. So the GDP deflator is going to be telling us basically how much of that is inflation. So the differences between that is telling us how much of it is inflation. So the interesting part of it is that I like to think of it because it's deflator. Think about this, giant balloon that you're blowing up, right? And nominal GDP has the balloon way overinflated, okay? The GDP deflator is telling us, okay, how much do we need to shrink this by to be able to bring it back down to reality and bring it back down to real GDP, which is more accurate. So if you were given, for example, the GDP deflator and the nominal GDP, you should be able to figure out real GDP. All right. The GDP deflator, it doesn't overstate the problem like the CPI, because we said the CPI is a lot, it changes and fluctuates a lot, because the GDP deflator isn't a fixed basket of products from one year to the next. We are looking at nominal versus real in the same year. So some people say that GDP deflator is a better representation of inflation as a whole. And then I do have, that's it. All right, let me know if you have any questions, and that's it for this module.